So a couple of interesting things have been shared so far at this conference. Personally, I just found, the presentation that was delivered by Swedbank and USA, just to be, both of those presentations were inspiring. And it's very hard to present right after such an inspiring presentation. And Darius mentioned that he's not going to bore you with numbers and figures and facts. And then I thought about my presentation. It's like, I think I have stats on every single slide. So I'm wondering, okay, how do I make this a little bit more interesting? But I think this will be interesting. So, it'd be great if each presentation was delivered by an end user like USA or Swedbank, and you had the opportunity to see how different organizations have used these technologies. That's not always feasible. And so what I've tried to do is take a number of case studies that some have been presented previously at the Opus conferences, some that are net new, and try to condense them into a very short presentation just to give you an overview of how these technologies are being used today by various organizations. And I know that this is both intelligent authentication and intelligent assistance. I'm going to focus more on the authentication piece of the puzzle, but I'll link it back to the intelligent assistant space. Because as Darius mentioned, I do believe that these two technologies are very much related. I also want to pick up on a comment that was made, right? What's the role of humans versus machines in this equation? And I don't have the answer to that question. But I do know that humans should not be handling security. That is one thing that I know for sure. I've been in the security business for over 15 years, and I have never seen a security process that is driven by humans to lead to any form of success, either to get legitimate people through the process or to keep the bad guys out. And some of the data and some of the case studies that we're going to go through are going to highlight that and really showcase why organizations have been moving away from the traditional forms of authentication that are very much human-centric. And that's a little bit of a paradox when you think about biometrics, because we think about biometrics as being the most human type of authentication, right? Because it's measuring our fingerprint or our iris or measuring our voice. But what I mean by not having the human in the picture is not having the onus of security on the human, right? So there's no effort, there's no task, there's nothing to know, to remember, and hopefully at some point there's nothing really to do, right? We're not there yet, but that's where we're trying to head to. Now, voice biometrics in particular has had a lot of traction in the media, especially in the UK, if you've been following the news in the last couple of weeks or months. And I think that a lot of that is due to the frustration that people have with the existing authentication methods. And probably the most frustrating authentication process that we have to go through, a lot of us talk about frustrations with passwords, but the most frustrating authentication process is not the password that you use to log in to your banking website, because it's probably something that you do fairly frequently. The most frustrating authentication process is when you actually have to call and you have to go through that interrogation process, or you're asked for a telephone PIN that you set up potentially 5 years ago and you've completely forgotten. And so that process is very frustrating. So being able to eliminate that very frustrating process is something that's seen as very positive, and that's getting a lot of traction in the media. But beyond it being something that's very interesting, there is just massive adoption of voice biometrics that's occurring. And the numbers are just increasing at a phenomenal rate. I presented for the first time at the Intelligent Authentication Conference that Opus held. Back then it was called the Voice Biometrics Conference. I think it was back in 2013. And back then we had about 10 million voice prints deployed. So these numbers are specific to Nuance. It's not providing a holistic industry view. Opus has those numbers. But the growth in the numbers of organizations that have deployed this technology, the growth in just the adoption of these technologies by individuals has just been staggering. I had to update this number last night. I had some late night calls with colleagues in China and then after in India, and we just had updates on some of our deployments, and the growth and the scale of those deployments is just truly phenomenal. And so there's a wide range of organizations that have deployed this technology. Before I dive into the case studies, I do want to mention that we are seeing organizations beyond the financial sector deploy this. So yes, this is a technology that has been driven by the financial vertical. We have seen a lot of financial institutions deploy this, especially in the early years. We've seen organizations deploy this for very high-risk transactions, right? That was the mindset. We need to secure corporate accounts. We need to secure wire transfers. We need to secure high-net-worth individual accounts, right? That was the original mindset. So if you want 7, 8 years ago, virtually all voice biometric deployments were in those use cases. What we're seeing today is a change in mindset. And we're seeing, no, we want all of our customers, right? We want all of our retail customers to leverage this. And we're seeing organizations such as telcos, we're seeing organizations such as government agencies leverage this technology as well. And so it's not only for those high security applications. But before we move into those new use cases, I'll start with a very traditional use case within the banking sector and within the contact center. So voice biometrics is a technology that makes a lot of sense in an interaction where you're going to be using your voice. And clearly, when you're on the telephone and you're either speaking to a human being or speaking to an automated system, that is a very logical place to be authenticating people using this technology. So we've seen a lot of organizations deploy this first in the contact center. I'm going to be talking about other channels in a couple of slides. I've decided to mention the Royal Bank of Canada just because they had a deployment last year. So this is a relatively new deployment, and they just had fantastic results. They were one of the first organizations to decide we're going to deploy this to all of our retail customers from day one. There's no segmentation. There's no slotting our customers into specific categories. We're just delivering this to everybody from day one. And something very interesting happened. So I remember at previous conferences, a lot of questions, well, what kind of customers are going to adopt this technology, right? Maybe this is a technology that's going to be adopted by millennials. Maybe this is a technology that's going to be adopted by very educated, high net worth individuals who understand the security value of this. Well, the Royal Bank of Canada has a 96% enrollment rate. And this is across all demographics. They're a very, general purpose retail bank, and so really all the different stratas of society are their customers. And because they launched voice biometrics to all of their customers from day one, they realized fantastic business results. Now, I can't share the specific dollar amounts that were saved, but I can say that it far surpassed their expectations. And within 3.5 months of launching the system, they had realized more savings than they had anticipated in the first year of the deployment. So needless to say, they were very happy with the system, and I had the pleasure of hearing a presentation from the RBC just a couple of weeks ago in Toronto, where they basically said that now they're expanding voice biometrics to other channels, so mobile app, web, and so forth. So really the contact center is just a step one in a process of bringing this technology to other channels. Another thing that's very interesting is for those of you who have been tracking voice biometrics and have been tracking the use of voice biometrics in the contact center is a little stat here that you may have not necessarily paid much attention to, is that most of the customers are authenticated with only 3 seconds of audio. Now, on the technology side, that's just phenomenal. I mean, we were definitely not there a couple of years ago. where it took maybe 10, 15 seconds to authenticate somebody. So this is, as the technology is progressing, as the algorithms get better and better and more robust, the authentication process becomes even quicker and more seamless, both for the agent and for the human, for the customer. And if you think about it, this is actually very much relevant to the virtual assistant use case, right? And I'll get to that later. But the ability to authenticate somebody in a very short period of time, right, with free-form speech, is exactly what we need for this technology to work very well with a speech-enabled virtual assistant. But more about that later. The last stat that I want to share is that there was a significant increase in the customer satisfaction rating. So again, I'm not allowed to share the pre-customer sat rating, but all I can say is that the 8.8 over 10 rating is a significant improvement over what was experienced before, right? So if you take away that authentication process in the contact center, then you eliminate a huge piece of frustration, right? So instead of reaching an agent and going through this long interrogation process, right? Now when you call the RBC, agent picks up the phone and says, "Hi, how can I help you?" Right? And that's just truly transformational. It sounds like a small thing, but it really is transformational, right? Where the human agent can start assisting the customer immediately. Now, a case study that's closer to home for some of you, Barclays, especially Barclays Wealth. Probably most of you in the room are aware that they're a longstanding user of voice biometrics. They were one of the first organizations to deploy voice biometrics in the contact center at the agent level. Many of you have already seen these stats, but for those of you who haven't, it just showcases that even the state of the technology as it stood back in 2011, 2012 could deliver phenomenal results. And we had a fantastic presentation yesterday for those of you who were in the authentication conference by Matt Smallman, who was directly involved in this project. So you can ask him more about this if you wish. But these are some of the statistics that were shared by Barclays shortly after the deployment. And the one thing that I want to point to is, again, the improvement in the customer experience, right? So this is a technology that really transforms that customer experience. And in the case of Barclays, they reported that 93% of all customers rated the system a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. And again, that's a huge improvement over what it was before. Now, I've had a number of individuals come up to me and say, "Brett, it's great that you have these large organizations such as Barclays, such as RBC deploy this technology, but we don't have millions and millions of dollars in our pockets, right, to invest in this technology." And that's why I decided to share the story of Eastern Bank. So Eastern Bank is a small community bank. Most of you haven't heard about it unless you're from in the Boston area, in the state of Massachusetts, where they operate. So they really only operate in one state. And they pride themselves on being a community bank, right? They pride themselves on being different from the large financial corporations. And they want to position themselves as being closer to their members, closer to their customers, right? Giving a more human interaction, more friendly interaction, a more personalized interaction. And the issue that they were having is that they were realizing that, they weren't really meeting that expectation, right? By having a convoluted authentication process. And so by eliminating, again, once again, that authentication process, they were able to live up to that expectation of, delivering a higher level of customer service. And so they're an organization that has less than 100 agents in their contact center. So we're not talking about, some of the organizations such as RBC or Barclays that have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of agents in the contact center. So yes, this is a technology that does scale up, and it also scales down. One of the interesting things that came out from the Eastern Bank deployment was how the agents reacted to the technology. And we have always focused on how this impacts the customer, right? How the customer experience is improved. But it turns out that the impact on the agent is just as powerful, if not more. And it's often overlooked. It's often overlooked when you build your business case. It's often overlooked when you're just talking about the technology. And if there's one thing that comes out of this slide, hopefully it's that you really should be thinking about the agent impact. So the agents rated the system as just being truly transformational for their jobs. And a lot of things started happening. Absenteeism went down, right? Agents actually started showing up to work more often. Agent turnover went down, right? People stayed with the organization longer. Now, for those of you who are in the contact center space, you know that those two metrics are extremely important because there's a lot of cost, right? So Darius mentioned, right, the cost of labor, right, and that the cost of labor increasing. Well, a huge cost is just finding that labor and replacing it and training it, right? And an agent that has been in the contact center for 5 years is clearly much more efficient than an agent that you just hired 30 days ago, right? So when you lose those individuals, when they don't show up for work, then that has a huge impact. And so here are some specific stats on the agent impact. Barclays Wealth, at a previous conference, I think it was last year, also shared a very similar data point. So 6% reduction in absenteeism and also a reduction in turnover. So what are the financial impacts of having your agents actually show up to work, right? What are the financial impacts of them not leaving your organization? I'm sure that is something that's quite material, right, that you can build into your business case. So far I've shared a couple of case studies that have been focused on contact center. So now I want to move into the automated space, right? So slowly linking it back to the topic that some of you have come here for. I'm going to start slow. I'm going to move into the IVR, so the automated portion of the contact center. And I've decided to share a case study about Manulife. Manulife is an insurance company. They're based out of Canada. You may start seeing a trend. I am Canadian, so I root for fellow organizations, for my compatriots. But in all seriousness, it's a very interesting case study because they are an insurance company. They're not a financial company, and so just an example of an organization that's outside of the immediate financial space that had decided to leverage this technology as well for their purposes. And they had a much more focus than others on increasing automation. So they had made a number of investments in their automated platform, in their IVR, in the contact center. But a lot of those functions were just not being used. And the number one reason that they weren't being used is that people weren't authenticated. So in the banking space, your chances of getting authenticated in the contact center or in the automated system are slightly higher because you're probably going to call your bank more frequently than your insurance company. So in the insurance space, the call frequency is very, very low. And so, at first, you could come to the conclusion, well, this is not a good fit for voice biometrics because, customers don't call frequently, so it's going to take time to enroll them, and it's going to take time to deliver a benefit. But it's the other way around, right? So their challenge was because people don't call in often, they can't use a PIN because they have no idea what the PIN is, right? And they can't be identified with a member ID because they have no idea what that member ID is. So you just have to scrap that old way of thinking, right? Member ID plus PIN to authenticate members and identify them and come up with a completely different process. And so now when you call into the Manulife toll-free number, the first question that's asked, and I think that this is brilliant, is how can I help you, right? Describe in a few words how it can help you. And so the customers call in, they describe their intent, and then they're authenticated as a second step where they speak at Manulife, my voice is my password, and they get authenticated that way. Now this deployment is also very successful, and Manulife is now looking at next steps in expanding this to other channels such as the web and the mobile app. And now that they've built this platform in the IVR, right, that can handle these how can I help you requests, right, that's intelligence and those are interactions that can be used in those platforms as well, whether through voice or through text. Now very quickly, right, this is very rare that you see C-level executives and especially the CEO of an organization get really excited about a technology that's in the contact center, especially in the IVR. But the day that the system was launched, the CEO of Manulife, started tweeting about the system, and there was just a great level of excitement within the organization because he saw the transformational nature that this technology was bringing, both the intelligent automation plus the voice biometrics, right, combined, allowed them to do something that they were really challenged to do before, and the possibility of using those technologies across various channels was also very exciting. Before I move into fully digital interactions, I want to mention one last case study, which is in the contact center, in the IVR, in that Santander. So Santander is a organization that had presented once again at a previous conference, provided a great number of stats on their deployment. But I think one thing that they did that was truly fascinating is that yes, they use it for their own customer calls. They realized some savings very, very quickly. They enrolled 75% of their customer base, so 3 million customers. This is in their Mexico operations. 75% of their customers within the first 12 months. And so that part of the deployment just worked brilliantly. And that's, at the previous conference, that's what they presented on. But what I found really interesting is that they decided that this was an asset, right? So the biometric credential that they had on their customers was an asset, and that they could actually start offering it as a service. And so voice biometrics has become a revenue generator for Santander for a very specific use case where they're offering to authenticate and to validate the identity of citizens for various government organizations. So to put that into context, I'm going to play a very short video. We had a little bit of audio-video trouble with this, so hopefully it's going to play. And it is in Spanish, so for those of you who don't speak Spanish, just read the subtitles. Hopefully you'll be able to follow this. Oops.
Esta revista aquí, pero él, como estaba malito de su pie ya, teníamos que traerlo en andadera.
Ella es diabética y tengo que ponerle insulina, tengo que darle una dieta, medicamentos y todo eso se descompensa viniendo hasta acá.
Lo traía mi hijo cada 6 meses, tenía que venir en silla de ruedas.
Muy desgastante venir así, tener que pagar taxi para transportarse.
Es la muerte venir, pero hay que venir.
Ahora con Viva Voz, cuando el pensionado marque a firma vocal, el sistema certificará automáticamente los rasgos de su voz, cumpliendo el pase de revista sin salir de casa y con solo repetir una frase.
En Banco Santander, mi voz
Es mi firma.
Para ella es mucho mejor y para todos los demás también, porque la mayoría son personas de la tercera edad y son enfermos. Entonces, hablando por teléfono, para ellos es más cómodo.
Sí me parece muy buena porque si no tengo que venir, yo no me canso tanto y ella sufre menos.
Más beneficio porque nada más hablamos y ya podemos pasar la revista.
So the use case is citizens have to go into a government office, right? In their case, it was I believe every 6 months, and they need to prove that they're still alive in order to receive pension payments. And so that was a process, right? And so Santander went up to the first government agency they reached out to was the actual city of Mexico and the pensioners that they were handling. So we're talking about firefighters, we're talking about police officers, we're talking about bureaucrats that work for the city administration. And they said, well, how about we authenticate you with our voice, authenticate those pensioners with the voice biometric system, and that way you know that they're still alive and kicking, and they can do that over the phone. Then you don't need to walk into an office. And so that was a first step into monetizing their deployment, and now there's a number of government agencies that are doing the same. And now in Mexico, there are several other banks that have deployed similar systems. So if you look at Banamex or Bancomer, they all have the same voice biometric systems that they're offering for government services. Now, all of my data points have been very much focused on how does this improve either the customer experience or the agent experience. But this is a security technology after all. And so the question that a lot of you may have is, well, is this actually more secure than what we're replacing it with? So yes, that authentication process that we had in the contact center before was very challenging, but maybe it worked, right? The authentication process that we have in a mobile app, maybe that's unpleasant, but maybe it's working. Maybe the authentication process that we have on the web, maybe that's working very well. So maybe all that frustration is worth it. Well, the truth is that it really isn't, right? So Darius mentioned in his presentation, right, all those stats about organizations getting their passwords, compromised, and hackers, compromising databases. But in the contact center in particular, the dangers are acute. And I believe it was Matt Smallman who mentioned yesterday, and it looks like the fraud in the contact center is increasing at about 20% on a yearly basis. So these are very significant numbers. And this very short video will show you why fraud is increasing.
So I invited a few of the world's best hackers to try to hack me and show me where my vulnerabilities are. And now I'm going to meet them in Las Vegas for DEF CON, the biggest hacker convention of the year. They're going to hack me using social engineering, which is essentially hacking without any code. They just use a phone and an internet connection.
Do you want to do a sample phishing call?
What's phishing?
Phishing is voice solicitation, and basically what you do is you use the phone to extract information or data points that can be used in a later attack.
Let's do it. Who are you going to call?
Maybe I'll call your cell phone provider and see if I can get them to give me your email address.
I bet they're good. I bet they have my back. But yeah, go for it.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Can you hear me okay? My baby, I'm sorry. my husband's like, we're about to apply for a loan and we just had a baby and he's like, get this done by today. So I'm so sorry. I can't call you back. I'm trying to log into our account for uses information and I can't remember what email address we used to log the account. The baby's crying and can you help me? Awesome.
In just 30 seconds,
At gmail.com?
Jessica gets access to my personal email address.
Now, if I needed to add our older daughter on our account so she could call in and make changes, how would I need to go about doing that? You would have to send me a secure PIN through a text message? Yeah, well, the thing is, I don't think I'll be able to receive a text message if I'm on the phone. Shh. Oh, I'm not on there either? So I thought when we got married, he added me to the account.
Jess uses my girlfriend's name and a fake social security number
5127.
to set up her own personal access to my account.
Wait, I'm sorry, so there's no password on my account right now? Can I set that up?
She even gets the support person to change my password.
Thank you so much for your help today.
So she just basically blocked me out of my own account.
I'll get her fed after this. All right, thank you.
Holy shit. So they just gave you access to my entire cell phone account.
You're gonna have to go on and change your password now because it's Jess, my name.
And all it took was a crying baby and a phone call.
Yes.
So sometimes you can think that hacking is like really sophisticated, right? And you think about this geek who's in his basement and he knows all this code and he knows all these techniques and he's surrounded by computer equipment. The reality is it's really simple, right? You don't need to be a geek. All you need to do is be pretty smooth on a phone call, right, as it turns out. And a lot of fraud is actually occurring in digital channels, but the accounts are being compromised through the phone channel, right? Because that's just the easiest way for a hacker. Like, why would they spend time trying to compromise your password when they can just ask for it, right? Why spend time decrypting a database, on the dark web when you can just call, right? In only 2 minutes, right? It's not a huge time investment for the hacker. Now, I've shown this video in previous presentations, and I've had people come up to me after and say, well, that lady on the phone, I mean, she was really good. She's a professional. She does this all the time. Most people wouldn't be able to pull that off. Well, there's a study that was published in Australia that proves otherwise. And I don't have it here on the slide, but in some, there's a university professor that asked a number of students, right? So not professionals, not professional hackers, just a bunch of students to try to call into the top 3 financial institutions in Australia. And the mission to the students was try to compromise an account, try to take over an account. And this is a bank, so you think this is going to be a little bit, or these are banks, this is going to be a little bit harder. So this is the time of my presentation where I'm going to involve you. So anybody want to guess what the success rate was for the students? There's no prize. 80, 100%? 80%? Any other guesses? 60%? 70? Hey, you're in the right range. So it's not 80, it's not 100%. It was 67% success rate. If I'm a hacker and I know that I have a 67% success rate and all it takes me is a 2-minute phone call to take over an account, those are pretty good odds, right? And so something has to be done, right? And that's another reason why organizations have been moving forward with voice biometrics, is to address this fraud issue. And although I'm a very proud Canadian, I decided to share some UK data here. And these are 2 UK citizens that are now behind bars thanks to the use of voice biometrics. And there are individuals across the world that have fallen to a similar fate, but I wanted to share something that was local. And so one thing that's really transformational with the use of voice biometrics is that all of a sudden now you have a method of proving, right, that a certain individual, right, actually committed the fraud, right? So a lot of our techniques before, especially in the authentication space, passwords, PINs, security questions, were designed to prevent people from getting through. But now if they do get through, if they do actually call into a contact center and speak, right, now you have evidence, right? They're leaving their fingerprints on the crime scene. And so that allows organizations to do something about this. And there was a study published last year that showcased that about 90% of phone fraud could be addressed with voice biometrics, and about 80% of fraud that currently occurs through digital channels could also be affected or impacted by voice biometrics, so some impactful stuff. And I want to give a shout out to Opus Research. They did some fantastic work. So if you want to know why voice biometrics is so much more effective than other methods at securing these channels, please go on the Opus website, and there's a whole report that dives into this topic and that compares voice biometrics to the other channels. So I see people taking pictures. Don't just go on the Opus website and download the report. So digital channels. So I'll end with that. And again, just linking it all back to the virtual assistant. So we commissioned a third party to perform a study on how consumers would authenticate on mobile devices given multiple choices. And what we were specifically looking at were passwords, fingerprint, and voice biometrics. So those are the three modalities that the participants could leverage. And it turns out that purely from an effectiveness perspective, voice was the most effective form of authentication. Fingerprint was the least effective form of authentication, just purely from a success ratio perspective. And password was somewhere in between. And yet people's preferences, when the researchers actually asked them how they would, which authentication methods they would use, were not necessarily directly linked to which method was more successful or least successful. So the least favorable option was password. So that was the method that people wanted to use the least. The most favorable one was fingerprint, even though that had the lowest success rate. And voice biometrics was somewhere in between. And the main reason that was provided was it's all a question of context, right? So, and it's also a question of speed. And so passwords are long and annoying to type in. Putting your finger on the reader is very quick. And so even if I fail, right, I can get that feedback that I failed very quickly, and then I can switch over to another authentication method. And so we have definitely, when speaking to our customers, have definitely promoted using multiple biometric technologies, and that's definitely a direction that we're moving into as well. And some of the organizations that have done this include the Australian Tax Office. So I mentioned government organizations that have moved in this direction. And now on their mobile app, first of all, isn't it amazing that the tax office has a mobile application? The really innovative thinkers in Australia, where you can authenticate either with fingerprint or with voice biometrics to the mobile app. And a transition away from PINs, passwords, and security questions, right? So we still see organizations where you have biometric modalities in these digital channels, but you still have the password there. It's still there. As long as that password is still there, as long as that PIN is still there, you haven't really improved security, because the hacker, right, will always use the lowest common denominator, right? They're not going to try to compromise the more complicated authentication method. So you need to really move away, right, from those legacy authentication processes, and we've definitely seen organizations do that. Australian Tax Office, they were kind enough to share some data, so you can definitely look through that. And I also wanted to showcase how quickly they moved through this process, where they deployed voice biometrics in the contact center at the agent level, in the contact center at the IVR level in the automated system, and in the mobile app. And just to top it off, they also deployed a virtual assistant. So all these technologies are working together. And currently they have close to 1.6 million, or a little bit over 1.6 million citizens that are using this technology. So we're seeing a number of organizations that are moving in this field, and we're actually seeing organizations that are deploying voice biometrics first in digital channels. So that's a huge transformation in this industry, and we're seeing more and more organizations deploy both virtual assistants and voice biometrics at the same time. So one of the banks that I bank with, is called Tangerine in Canada, and they were one of the first to deploy both a virtual assistant and voice biometrics in their mobile application, and they did that first. And they then expanded voice biometrics into the contact center. So there is a shift happening in the marketplace. And this is my last video that I want to share with you, just quickly showcasing what that interaction would look like. And this is a video that was produced by US Bank. If only we can play it. As I told you, we had a little bit of...
At US Bank, my voice is my password.
Thanks. Here is your account summary.
Pay my statement balance from my checking account.
It's a very quick, very, very short interaction, right? But we had authentication and a transaction taking place within a couple of seconds. And when these organizations, such as US Bank, such as Tangerine, such as ING Bank in the Netherlands, when they reached out to their customers and they asked, like, why do you appreciate this experience? The number one response was, just the speed and the ease of doing business, right? So we had a little bit of that. We touched on that topic in the previous conversation, right, about just making it easy, making it immediate, making it 24/7. And a virtual assistant with biometric authentication makes that whole process seamless. So where are we headed? Where's the future? Well, how many of you have seen the movie Her? You guys are very honest. That's great. I mean, I've seen in other presentations, we gave a similar presentation in Dallas and had two people, put their hand up like this. So I know there were some embarrassing scenes in that movie. So I fully understand your hesitation to lift your hand. But, right, what does this movie show, right? This is the best advertising ever for voice biometrics and virtual assistants. Because it showcased how this technology can work, right? And how can it be intelligent and seamless and human-like. And forget about the whole romance part of it, right? I mean, they had to make a movie. They had to make people watch it, right? But purely from a technology perspective, what was showcased in that movie is absolutely where virtual assistants are going. And you'll notice that voice biometrics was a key part of that movie as well, right? So that the main character was interacting with the virtual assistant through voice and was being recognized by their voice, just like a human would, right? And that's really what we're headed. We're trying to make these automated interactions more human-like so that they become more impactful, so that organizations such as the banks, the telcos, and even government agencies can start treating us, consumers and citizens, as human beings, right? And the only way that we can do that is with the intelligence of a virtual assistant. And one component of that intelligence is its ability to recognize who you are in the most seamless way. So that's my presentation. I hope that the case studies that were showcased and the data points that were shared were useful to you. There are many, many more. So if you do have an interest to find out about other organizations, how they've used the technology, if you want to know about potentially in your home market, in your vertical, feel free to come see me during a break, and I'll be more than happy to share some additional case studies. Thank you.